Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and today I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Scott Richardson-Reed, author of the popular blog, The Cailleachs Herbarium, where he writes about Scottish folk magic, folklore, and herbalism. I've followed the Cailleachs Herbarium, and that's spelled CAILLECHS-HERBARIUM.com. Cailleachs Herbarium. So I've followed this blog for a few years now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the depth of research and the frank discourse that Scott brings to topics like cultural and spiritual appropriation, reclaiming or reimagining ancestral practices, and animism in Scottish myth. So I'm delighted to share with you a long-awaited conversation, or long-awaited by me anyway, with Scott Richardson-Reed. This is the conversation in which I learn that I have an accent. So Scott, thanks for being on the show. Super excited to connect with you finally in person. Let's open with the standard question. What identities do you lead with?
Do you know that the question of identity is difficult, isn't it? Because we come from identity at so many different angles and so many different perspectives. It's kind of hard to know who you are from day to day, because right now I'm just a very happy person speaking to you, Carmen, on your podcast. But in terms of identity, we could maybe go through kind of ancestry, and I'm sure there's an interesting kind of way of looking at identity through that, or we could go through what I do for a living, or we could approach it from what I do in my spare time. Am I a devil? Am I a saint? Am I a monster? I don't know. We're kind of a little bit of all of these things, I think, in terms of identity. But I guess you would probably say, on the surface, I'm probably somebody who is half Scottish and half English, hence the accent that you can kind of maybe hear. And I live in a queer relationship with my other half, so that's another identity that I have. I am also a huge proponent of human rights for people who might come from minority and disadvantaged backgrounds as well, and a human rights activist, I should say. So I do a lot of that work. But I'm also a writer, and I'm also a poet, and I'm also a photographer, and I'm also someone that loves the outdoors. So I guess depending on where you're at is kind of depending where your identity sits. But if you want, I can reel off my genealogy. We could be here for the whole hour and then it's done.
What if we just went back like 2 or 3 generations? I am curious about the genealogy.
Yeah, okay. So my mother is a Lone and a MacDonald. My dad is a Reed, and therefore English. We don't want to go down that route. But beyond my mom and my gran, Mary Lone, and she was a Mary MacDonald. Her mother was a McCracken, and so the McCracken were from Ireland. And if anyone knows about genealogy and has done genealogy, they will know that when you start to get back in time with Catholic families, everybody kind of has the same name repeated over and over and over again. So yeah, we kind of go way back in the McCracken line, and I have to say we're all scoundrel farmers or bums of a certain degree, but then became sept of the McNaughton clan a long time ago. So that's kind of our lineage, if you like, on our Scottish side, which is more interesting than the English side, because I think they were all just also equally bummish, if we're being honest. So like the lineage of the family, for instance, I'm the first in my family line to ever go to university, to ever sit like a master's degree at college, and to look to doing a PhD. So I kind of broke the mold a little bit in lots of different ways, I think. But in terms of that kind of genealogy, that's where it flows into Catholic farming stock as we move from Scotland, West Coast into Ireland as well. That's kind of where we came from.
So interesting. So
how about a bit of the history of your blog, the Cailleachs Herbarium?
Sorry, how about the water? Yeah. Sorry, taking the mickey out of your Canadian accent's terrible.
Did I say a boat?
Maybe, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, a little bit. But I'm also curious though about the Cailleachs Herbarium. I'm going to say it because I have to be honest with you, having read it all this time, I have had a woman's voice in my head. And so
I get that.
What's the deal with your relationship with the Cailleach?
Right. Oh my gosh, we're going to go back years and years and years and years now. And so I'm going to make it a very potted history. Where I lived, we were involved, like we lived in the middle of a forest, and this is going to sound like one of those, like, yeah, it's purely not talking sense, but I got involved quite early on with Wiccan religion, and I was about 17 when that happened, and it was really, really interesting, and there were lots of groups of interesting people, but also there was an undercurrent of creepiness, if we're being honest, and there was something kind of not quite right about the person who ran it. And without going into too much details, he turned out to be quite a deviant, and so ties were broken. But I never really lost that kind of connection and trying to be in touch with community. And for me, community was not just people, it was also kind of the land that we lived in. And this is where it kind of started, that journey. And then I felt that I needed to work out what was what as a young person leaving that kind of situation, and worked with a lot of minority cultures and groups that were open to abuse, and people with mental health problems and homelessness and drinking problems, and like the kind of whole 9 yards, but always took that kind of ethos that we are in community together. And like, that's where I've always felt that the kind of true magic sits, is that when people get together and share stories and share things, that's where we start to kind of see things move forward. But also carrying that torch for the, I guess the term now is the kind of animist term of the non-human community, or the other than human community, that it's not just who we talk to, but it's also where we are and kind of how we feel. So that kind of carried on with me all the way through. And I guess I was always seeking something that was more authentic than the shitty experience I had in the kind of Wiccan world, if you like. And that's not to say Wiccan is a problematic thing at all. It just happened to be this incarnation of it, I think, with this group. And I just researched really, really hard, like really, 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 really hard to find out where we're at. And a lot of it was done through stories of kind of my history and my family stories. And the disclaimer is there's nothing spooky about my family at all. There's no like granny was a spay wife kind of stuff. But yeah, it kind of.
Can you explain what a spay wife is before you carry on?
Oh, a spay wife, the word you can spay means that you can look at the future of things, like you're a spay wife. It comes from that kind of, you're spaying, and some people would have a natural talent for it, as in kind of the second sight. And I guess we can go there later. And how do you say it in Gaelic? Oh gosh, Andichialu, I think, is second sight in Gaelic. Don't shoot me with my pronunciation, but it's that Andach Hialu, means second sight, second hand sight. Yeah, so this kind of journey, long story short, I guess, I started to see a lot of people who were interested in Scottish folk traditions and folk magic. And I'm going to touch on that kind of tartan washing idea, that sometimes people can say something is Scottish when it's not necessarily representative, and it's kind of like a mixture of things. And that idea of someone claiming something is traditional when it's not really, and it starts to really annoy me a little bit. So I was like, gosh, there are so many people out there looking for something, and I'm a researcher. I have a huge research background. And I'm just like, well, I'm going to start writing about it. But this was all kind of this is the spooky bit, I guess, Carmen, that there is a place in Glenlyon called Taig na Bodak, which means the house of the old man, and it's in Glen Cailleach, which means the Glen of the Old Woman, and you can find it on a map. You can pinpoint it on an Ordnance Survey map. And I went there with my partner, just kind of like, what can I do about this kind of this feeling that I have? And we went all the way there, and this is the first time I've ever done something kind of pilgrimage-like, or kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna go, and the kayak and the thing's going to tell me I'm doing the right thing, and it's all going to be beautiful, and yeah, I'm going to be like the magicest wizard ever. No, that's not how it happened at all. I literally got there, and I'm not somebody that has second sight by any means. I probably have like a millimeter of psychicness. It's kind of like I know when my tea is maybe being made, but that's about it. And I took the divination tools, and they're called skyrie stones. If you've ever, they're actually not on my blog. It's something that we put out through the Tales of the Cailleachs project. But it's, in simpleness, there are 3 stones. There's a red one and a white one and a black one. And they have a face. So they have an up face and a down face. So very simply, if you throw them on the floor and they all come up with the up face, or however you want to look at them, it's a yes. If they're all down faces, it's a no. And then if there's a combination of 2 or 1, then it's like not likely, maybe a bit more likely. But so I went and I was like, yeah, I'm here. I kind of want to know, am I doing the right thing? Should I be focused on it? It was literally loads of no's, and you wasted your time. There's no point. But the one thing that did was like a huge yes, is like, just write about it and find your own space with it. So I was like, okay, if that's the only yes of this mega trip that we've just taken through moors and stuff, I'm going to just go with that. So that's where the Cailleachs Herbarium came from, and that's where the writing started from.
Wow. Can you say the name of the stones and that divination system again?
Yeah, it's skyrie stones. It's Doric for colourful. I don't know if you know the Tales of the Cailleachs project, but
I've seen it on your website. Tell us more.
Yeah, gosh, so many questions. I had this. I do a lot of research, as you'll know, and I was finding a thread through some of the witchcraft trials from the 16th and 17th century in Scotland about these stones that in some of the witchcraft trials they're called slake stones. So it's S-L-A-I-K, which means release, as like you slake your sail and all of that kind of stuff. But only in one trial were they called that, and so I was kind of like, gosh, there's this whole way of interacting with the world that are within these trials, and what story do they tell? So being the researcher that I am, I looked through, there's the Scottish Survey of Witchcraft in Edinburgh, done by the amazing Dr. Julian Goodare, and he's fantastic, and the amount of work that he's put into this is phenomenal. If you can basically search all of the witchcraft trials by date, name, place, devil, not devil, whatever, you spit of salt, spit, piss, whatever, like you can literally find out what they're for. So I pulled all of the mentions of stones, just stones at this time, and then went through all of the court trials that are written in really, really old. I don't know if you've ever seen them. I will send you a page and you can see what I mean. You may want to put it in your blog.
Yeah.
What it looks like. And it's not like writing today. So it had to be I call it transliterated, but transcribed over. And it was a ton of work. But it turns out that looking at all of these different incarnations and from different places, there was a very familiar pattern of how these stones were used and what they were used for, the colors, the whole 9 yards. So I was like, I kind of need to bring this to life, because my Cailleachs shite, if we're being honest. My storytelling ability is maybe not very good. And I don't think it would have been done justice if it was just a kind of, here's an academic paper about some stones. And I'm sure there's people who listen to your blog like me who are massive nerds about this kind of stuff and will like be like, oh, this is amazing. But I think academia is also out of reach for a lot of people. It doesn't really bring it to life. And doing the work that I do with minority cultures and minority communities, I was kind of like, what would bring it to life for people more? So I approached a storyteller called Amanda Edmiston, who does the Botanica Fabula storytelling blog, and Debbie Armour, who now is in the band Bird Ellen. And together they took my research and they turned it into songs and stories and things and brought it all to life. So if you're like into that kind of stuff, you can hear the stories and the songs and the tales all kind of woven together that bring to life one particular witchcraft trial in Orkney. And it's by Jonnet. Jonnet's an amazing woman. And it was only in her later years that she got accused of maleficarum and like killing lots of people that had actually been absolute massive bastards to her. That she got charged with witchcraft, but she got away with it for a really long time. But she was kind of accused, I think, twice, and she was like found not guilty. And it was only the third time when she was accused of drowning a man's son out of spite by the beach that she got properly finished off. Let's just say. So the whole Slakestone story comes from Jonnet and others' testimonies, and I've brought together the best that I can do in terms of kind of reconstruction with that, and say, okay, this is what this might have looked like, and this is might how it worked. But there's also a few embellishments with it. So hence we don't call it the Slakestone method because that's the traditional name, and we call it the Skiddy Stone method because it's colourful stones, because there's 3 of them. So in the Tailleachs project, we are very clear that like this is the best guess that we can kind of do for that. But
well, we'll put a link in the show notes and everywhere we can to that project, because of course I'm like, oh, so cool.
Yeah, the chapbook that came with it sold out really quickly, and people are like, please reprint it. If there is enough interest, I will.
Right, if there's a wait list or something, okay, because
well, there's not so much
way for you to capture that.
There's not so much a wait list, it's more it's kind of like a limited thing. It was for the project, but the profits from the project for that allowed us to create an organization called the Woven Land Network, which is protecting what we're calling community folk heritage sites in Scotland, from caves to springs to wells. And so the money from it pays the performers, which is Amanda and Debbie, but then the rest of the profits go to the fund that helps the Woven Land Network to do what it does. So
okay, well, we're going to off air, we're going to figure out a way to capture the information of people who are interested in supporting this, so we can get a reprint going. So we'll let people know how listeners who missed out on the first edition can encourage you to put out another one. So I'll talk about that in the outro. Now, on your blog, you have a really excellent primer that I have shared widely, benefited from myself, read through footnotes, and recommended to folks. And it's multi-part. The title, The Good, the Dead, and the Fairy, Animism and Ancestors in Scottish Folklore. Can you give us just some of the highlights? What were you exploring in that series?
Do you know that like segues quite nicely actually from the Skirry Stone story, because that, when I was researching the Skirry Stone story, I was coming across a lot of testimony, for want of a better word, of people. Let's go back a step. People think witches, demons, devil, working with the devil, demons, blah blah, goddess, god, all of this kind of stuff that is not necessarily the way it was. And so some of the testimonies are like that, and I guess we have to realize that they are like that because of lots of different reasons of bias of the people recording it and all of these kind of things. And hands up, you know, also my own bias with reading it as well. We all have a lens. But there was a lot of witchcraft trials that talked about people hanging out with dead people, basically. And I was like, this is really, really interesting, because it's not actually, there's no like flying to the Sabbath on a broomstick stuff. It's just like Jeannie bumped into Thomas, who'd been dead for a while, and Thomas said, hey, I can help you out, actually, if you just promise me that you will be true in that kind of, I'll help you out if you just kind of say, yeah, I'll do these things for you. And I was like, okay, that's weird. Thomas, hi, whatever. But then people like Thomas kept like popping up. There was people from like Battles and others. If you look at the blog, there's a whole section of things. I can't reel them off the top of my head, if I'm being honest, because I don't have it in front of me and I can't remember things just off rote. But if you go there, you can kind of read all of these different incarnations of things. And I was like, so what is this all about? And so it kind of segued off the Skiri Stone stuff, because that's what I was looking for. And I was kind of like, all of these testimonies. And then we have a huge conflation with the dead and the fairy faith, or the she. And in Scotland, it's SITH. So it's a bit like Star Wars, the Sith, or whatever. And a funny story, I did a talk recently and that was the title, Battles with the Sith. And I was like, I hope you're not all here to know about the magic of Star Wars, because it's a completely different thing. Yeah, there was this whole, okay, what's going on here? Like, people are contacting the other world through their ancestry, right? And then if we start to think about all of the kind of fairy lore that we have, there's this whole, not so much overlap, but this kind of, they're in the same space. And there's a saying in Scotland that you're only ever 3 feet away from the other, which is really nice and very evocative of the fact that there's a connection there that we kind of miss. But so I don't know if I'm going in the right direction, but that idea that people who were accused of witchcraft actually were just contacting ancestral spirits of whatever nature, and they were helping them out, and they were basically helping people heal people, or find things, or fix stuff. They weren't like, yeah, let's all fly to this church on a broomstick and fuck up whatever we want to fuck up. It's like a completely kind of different experience. So that kind of what led to that whole because it is quite a vast, actually. I was reading it the other day and I'm like, gosh, it is quite long.
Well, it definitely seems like it's the summary for a book, right? There's just such fascinating material. And when the reason why I love it so much is, as a 5th generation settler in Canada of Scottish descent, my experience of ancestry is that, yeah, I kind of hop over the last few generations because, of course, I'm downstream I'm in the bottleneck of trauma, right? Dislocation in Scotland leads to, migration to Canada, but very difficult times here as well. And so here I am in Victoria, the traditional lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. I'm white. I'm dealing with the spirits of place who, so my ancestors, when I'm talking to my dead, my great-great Granny Graham, she's saying, yeah, I would like a little drambuie on this special night. But the spirits of the land are saying, alcohol is not really cool for us. And so if you could just do that a little bit, and so here I have the experience of this big ash tree in my backyard. And over time, I had a few different experiences where that a neighbor threatened the continued existence of that tree. And I turned into a crazy person and realized, oh my gosh, like my ancestors have actually taken up residence in this tree, and there's no fucking way this guy is gonna take it down or take it away. And it was just so visceral and kind of outside myself, but also in my DNA. And so when I read your article, I was like, well, wait a second now, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? Does this mean my ancestors have followed me to Canada? Am I appropriating? Am I imagining? Do they love, is my ancestor actually the ash tree, and the oversoul of the ash tree is calling to the people to sort of anthropomorphize, to talk to me? I'm just so curious what your thoughts are for folks who are not on the land where their ancestors lived.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because lots of people say 7 generations in and then you're there. But
what do you mean?
I have to preface this with I don't necessarily agree, but they say if you've lived in a place for 7 generations, that's when you can call it home. We have that a lot in where I live as well. I'll always be an outsider, and my kids would be outsiders, and their kids would probably just be locals after 3 generations of stuff. But I don't prescribe to that. And something off topic and off piste a little bit, but something worth thinking about. I have, this is not a fully formed thought yet, Carmen, but it's something that if we look at the tales that we have of when humans were first created, they were made of an ash tree and a rowan tree, a Carun tree, Carun in Gaelic. I couldn't tell you what the Gaelic for ash tree was, apologies. And so we came from the woods created by stuff. We don't know what the kind of Pictish or Celtic kind of thinking around this is, but there's a lot of conflation between the land where we live in fairy lore and the dead that live there. But one of the things I think that I haven't paid very much attention to, which I'm starting to think through, is, and it might seem like a weird segue, are the plants where we live our ancestors? Because if we have tales that we come from places like trees and things, and we have the well tree, the beal, the pillar tree, the center of things that could have been an ash or a yew tree, are we compartmentalizing who we are by not actually embracing the fact that we came from plants? And if you look at the science, I guess you could argue that we are all part plant down the line of, if you believe in evolution and all the rest of it. So that for me, there's that kind of, well, ancestry is maybe, in terms of, and in that kind of complex, is more complicated than maybe we're being too compartmentalized about, like, this is the dead and this is a nature spirit. And actually, if we look at the stories of fairy faith and the stories of the Sidhe and the good folk, it all interplays and overlaps. It's never like a single story. It's never like a single thread. But that's something I'm exploring, and people might be like, yeah, he's way off base. I don't know. But it's kind of something to think about, that maybe in our kind of limited scope of things, that we're too, like, this is this and that is that and that is not that, and those two things don't mix, because that's how we see the world. And actually the poetry and the songs of things don't care, because they sing in harmony with each other, and there's not that kind of compartmentalizing or that siloing of like ideas, like this is the dead and this is the nature spirit. Maybe they're one and the same thing. And like the Gena Loci or the genus Locorum, the plural of that is, maybe that is how some of those began. And it's my belief that, or my experience to a limited extent, that where I am in Scotland, that is definitely the case, that, you know, the Tuatha De Danann were buried in the Sidhe mounds, and we have to promise them a tithe of things, otherwise the crops fail. And here we have our original animist promise, that pact that you can see reflected further in the witchcraft literature and trials of the 16th and 17th centuries as we move forward. It's like, just keep your promise and you'll be okay. If you don't, I'll pull your eyes out and kill your husband. But in terms of your question, Carmen, I guess with where you're at and the place where you live, that's very, it's a difficult thing, because humans have made it really difficult, I think, because we are now aware of appropriation of ideas and identities where experientially you can't, it's going to sound weird, you can't experientially appropriate. Like, if I'm feeling something, that's my feeling and my thought. And if it's pure and I'm in a social vacuum, if you like, and I'm not aware of anything going on, I will still have that experience no matter where I am. But we filter it through a human, like, am I appropriating this, or is this something else? Or it's really, really complicated. And that identity question, again, is a really crucial one, and not one that's easily navigated through, I don't think. Because there are things where you live from traditions that you're not part of, and nor will you be, I guess, at some point, unless they invite you in to be part of. But then you're having an experience that is different, and then all you have to do is refer back to what your ancestry did. And I know that there's a lot of people that suggest, don't come to us for the answer, look to your ancestry and the traditions that you have there, but they are so separate and broken. And if we're being honest, because of colonialism and that Scotland experienced with the Highland clearances and all the rest of it, and all of these things of a melting pot, that people just got thrown around the whole of the planet, and they just got disconnected, and they took with them what they could. But for me, there's kind of like hope in history, I think. And this might come across really naive because I don't know American history very well, but I do know quite a few Appalachians, and I hope I said that right. And there is a colonialism that came with that, but within some of the things that they did in Appalachia, there is a blending of like powwow, Native American belief, Irish belief, the Red Church stuff, which is the Christian folk magic stuff. All of it kind of came to a thing, and they managed to successfully navigate as a community together through all of that, what we're finding really troublesome now. And I think there's a flag of hope in that. But I don't think your experience with the ash tree and where you're at should be invalidated because of the fear of appropriation. That's your experience. And that's something that you felt about that tree. The fact that you're asking yourself the question, where did that feeling come from? Am I just bonkers? Am I borrowing from something? The fact that you're aware and that you're asking yourself that question is a good place to be, if that kind of makes sense.
Can I ask you a bit about seining? Because you wrote an article about seining. Yeah, and I was quite surprised afterwards to read that then you needed to write a response almost because of a bit of the blowback from it. But it seems relevant also to the paradox of being a settler of Scottish descent and kind of part of the diaspora. So where I live, the indigenous folks, they through trade and such, there would have been white sage, but that's not really a thing that they would traditionally have done. The folks indigenous to the lands where I live they're water people, salt and fresh, and they would use cedar or different branches to brush themselves. That would have been kind of a cleansing or purification. And maybe there would have been some smoke of different kinds of plants, but not wanting to appropriate that, I started growing mugwort because I know that, mugwort, thyme, anybody of European ancestry, probably one of the worts was there and we could have used that. And so I grow that, I grow wormwood, different things like that. And I have the Carmina gadelica. I know that juniper and cleansing with juniper is like a thing, and that the term would have been seining, not smudging or necessarily cleansing, and it's kind of a blessing, kind of a cleansing. So this I know. I never really felt affinity for juniper until very recently, just last week actually. I spent 4 days, 3 nights fasting on the mountain, and it was pretty spare up there at 7,000 feet, and juniper is what still grows and sort of kept me company, and I felt more affinity then. And so now I'm like, okay, maybe I'll play around a little bit with juniper and see what they want to tell me. And I feel that as connection to my Scottish ancestry. But you as a Scottish person, how does it land for you to hear me say, I'm trying all these things? Because I don't know exactly what rings true for me.
That article was written because in Scotland, we have a lot of people who use smudging, right, which is a Native American practice, and they are the whitest white people you will ever meet. And I was like, hey, we need to be thinking about what we're doing, because it was rich. Because obviously I'm in Scotland, I write for Scotland, and it's just like, this is a conversation we need to have. There are people who I have spoken to, not directly, but online, and discussed this idea of appropriation from Native American cultures, who have expressed a real dislike for it, saying the kind of, this is our practices. Others have said, actually, I encourage people to do it because it makes money, or I welcome it. So there was all these different things. And I said, well, actually, I'm going to draw a line as a Scottish person. And I'm going to say, do you know what? If you want to think about this, don't call it maybe smudging, call it seining. And it comes from a Gaelic word, Sean, I can't pronounce it properly, but like to bless, basically. And when you do a charm or olas, or a ran, or whatever you want to call it, you would sein with your right thumb, and you would just say sein, sein, sein 3 times, and then that would be bless, 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 if you like, and it would kind of clear the air. So I was like, right, okay, let's look at what we do. Here's the things that we do as a culture. We don't only just burn stuff, we also cover ourselves with water and lustration and all of these kind of things. So if you're looking to re-examine your practice as a Scottish person and an Irish person to some extent, this is kind of where it's safe, this is your cultural stuff. But yeah, people went crazy about it. Really,
people especially white people, they sure don't like it when you take the fun toys away. That's how they see it. It's like, oh, this is really my adornment.
Yeah. So now I think juniper is really amazing because it like had a fight. Basically, it caused loads of people to get really, talking about a plant, had people get really aggressive. And I'm like, well, this is, I guess, the power of this plant is to kind of get you through troublesome times, right? Because here we are talking about this plant. That, like, it just blew up. That whole article just went crazy. But for me, you hearing that, I'm totally okay with that, because you are where you're at. And if I'm like, it's orthodox, you should use these things, it's dogma, it's like, well, it's not. Mugwort is one. It's like the idea that every culture around the world has this idea of doing something that clears, let's just call it clearing the air, for it to be inclusive of everyone's kind of ideas. And how that looks is very dependent on where people live and what they do. And obviously juniper in the Highlands was popular because it grew on all of the hills. And if you've ever been to Scotland, you will know all of the Munros in Scotland are huge and rocky and quite barren. So this is the tree, and as you come down, you get like cedar and others, and then mugwort and wild thyme, whatever, So I kind of welcome people treading carefully through that maze of appropriation and thinking about, okay, for me, it's really, really sad that people shut doors a lot on things, because I can understand it completely from a point of view that someone's borrowing from your culture and it's not welcome because you haven't asked for that. There's an interesting kind of parallel in a story, without kind of commenting on American culture, because I don't feel like I can, because I'm not so part of it. But there are, have you ever been to Skye, Carmen?
I've never been.
It's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. So we have loads more tourists coming over to Scotland because the pound has devalued and it's beautiful and loads of people are visiting. Also, Outlander happens. So we're having the Outlander effect and everybody wants to hold seances at Claver Carnes to bring fictional characters, but that's a whole different story altogether. So in Skye, they've started to run tours, like a bus company started to run tours. And this one guy in particular in this bus company is like, this river here is a fairy stream. You put your head in it and it makes you feel better. And the people in Skye are really annoyed about this fact. And I was like, oh, right, why is that? And it's because he said, well, it's not true. Well, that was the initial, well, it's not true. It's a made up story. This is not a true story. And I was like, okay, I can understand why people saying things that aren't true about where you live is really frustrating. And they said, but the thing is, like, it is true about this one over here. They have all of these beautiful tales and stories about this river, this stream, and this situation. And we were, as Scottish people do, we laugh about these things a lot. And they said, you know what is upsetting is the fact that it's not the fact that they're lying, it's the fact that the people who are part of the culture and part of this place have lots of stories to tell, and people aren't approaching them to hear them or having them join in the conversations that are happening around these different places that they have a lot to share and a lot of meaning and a lot of kind of history. So I was like, how amazing would it be then if the bus tour company had a night with you telling stories about the place where you live, and you can tell them the kind of the real stuff about it. And they said, yeah, it's beautiful. And I think that's, it's going it's just awkward, isn't it? You know, it's like somebody making money off something, and it's not even about the money, it's about the tales, and it's about the history, and about, you know, what's actually right about this. And it's not that people don't want to share it, it's just that they're being cut out a little bit from kind of joining in those conversations. But I guess I'm using that as a bit of a metaphor for, like, we need to be aware of the communities that we walk in and share stories with and share land with, and be open to sharing, kind of being told, actually, white person, stop being such an idiot. And not being so.
And also, I just want to amplify what you said about, you know, it's also about keeping the promise. So the people of that place have kept a promise to the Shia that we will keep your, pardon me, we'll keep your story for you, and we'll tell your story, and we won't forget you, and we'll remember you. So it actually does matter that it's not this stream, it's that stream. So it's like you said, I can hear the how egregious that, you know, what an affront that would be when you are embedded in a story and have deep relationship. It's not that you don't want to share. It's not that, you know, hey, we get it, we live in capitalism, it would be great to bring in, you know, increased economy to this island, you know, and based on something beautiful like the stories. But it starts to become exploitation when there isn't a kind of devotion, or at least discipline, a discipleship to how much can we actually point to in history is true. I think that seems very, very valid.
But it's the idea of community is like the magic of back to, gosh, I don't know if I mentioned the idea of community and being a sacred idea, that's where the magic's at. If we join together, we're better. And, you know, at the moment, the world's so full of division, and even in such a simple thing as that river is our thing, but it's not, there's just someone's lack of, like, okay, how do we just do the thing that we want to do without being wankers about it? Like,
yeah, how do we do it in a good way? So this is a nice sort of segue to a thought that I had also within your multi-part essay there. You talk about dead from the community. So you do reference, like, when we're talking about ancestors and the dead, of course we're talking about our bloodlines, but also there's a saying, and I wish I knew who to attribute it to, that we're raised by our bloodlines, our milk lines, and our storylines. And so our bloodlines, of course, our family, our milk lines that have, you know, nourished us, the people who may not have been blood relatives, but who created a container in which we could flourish. And then the storylines, you know, that beyond the remembered names, even of the stories that shape us. And so in your essay, you talk about the dead also include dead from the community. And I was wondering, who are you referring to there? Who are these dead from the community, and why is the community so important to the dead?
I guess because the dead are really important to the community would be the way of looking at that. I really feel, and again, there's an academic, maybe not here, that communities were more of a deal, you know, and in terms of, like, the non-human community, that was more of a deal at one time than we give it credit for. You know, we leave out milk and honey on rocks with hollows to bring in good dairy herd milking and all the rest of these kind of offerings. So there was something going on there that we acknowledge is bigger than just a family. And in terms of kind of like dead for the community, if you look to the witchcraft trials particularly, it's not like Jonet's granny that's popping up. it's like some guy that died in the Battle of Pinkie, like that she's like, oh, that's wee Nicky, actually, I ken him. It's got nothing to do with Jonet's bloodline, but it's got a lot to do with the community that she was in. And it's these that kind of come and promise or teach or do others. So that idea that like our ancestry is only through a bloodline, I think is a bit narrow, because I don't know, we could romanticize like the culture of the olden days where everyone was like, yes, we all got on, it was lovely. But if you think about how long it would take to bake a loaf of bread without what we have now, you would only be able to bake bread. You wouldn't be able to do anything else because it takes so much time. So you would need to kind of say like, I'll bake the bread if you gather the eggs and you do all these things. So the idea of maybe a bit more cooperation in smaller communities is not as maybe romantic as I'm making it sound, but it's a bit outside my pay grade to comment on, oh gosh, structure of 15th century Scottish villages, for instance. I just don't know. So the idea that our ancestry is bigger than ourselves, I think, is a really, really important one to hold on to. We've also got that kind of crazy idea that I'm thinking that our ancestry is also the plants around us in a way, and I think goes into a different way of thinking about ancestry. So again, if we look at the term differently in terms of ancestry, what does it, who built us? Because we're not just a thing that was born, we're also lots of other things. But also I think in terms of if you're adopted or in the queer community, you have your own chosen family as well. And it's not, imagine if we say covers like, sorry, you can't pay homage to that person because you know you're not actually even related to them, but you're like, but actually this person brought me up, it's my adopted mom and I love them, or like, this is my queer chosen family and I love them, what are you saying, you know? So for me, ancestry from the community is that kind of ancestry from the community. And like, even if we start to look at the idea of the first person to die in a graveyard. Do you know this kind of folklore? I'll keep it brief. So the idea is the first thing to die in a graveyard would become the guardian of that graveyard. So the first person to die basically and be buried would be the guardian spirit of that place. So here we have a kind of very clear link between dead and land spirit taking up residence, and they become the kind of the psychopomp for that space. So eventually it got to the point where they were like, hang on, we can't have like humans wandering around being guardians of places, we'll bury a dog first. And that's where you get the black dog myths from this kind of guardian, hounds of hell type kind of stuff. And Mark Norman's written a whole huge book about it if it's something you're interested in, black dog myths, and can probably do it more justice than me skipping over it kind of lightly. But that idea that we are linked to the community that we have, like we used to bury the dead in barrows and really in cairns, really near where we lived. We used to bury them under our floor. And the idea is that like the romanticized version, I guess, then of that kind of ancestry veneration is the people who you loved, who brought you together, are underneath your feet, and they are making the crops grow with their dead bodies. And we're surrounded by these kind of supportive things. And I guess that could be, again, classified as me being a bit romantic about it. But the idea is that's kind of where this comes from. It stems from that kind of like the roots that we have. And now we're all over the place. It's more difficult. But also there's that kind of discussion about, there's tradition on one hand, and I try very hard to piece together tradition. But if I hold it up to the light and it doesn't fit our experiences today, because we're not going to go around burying and murdering children, you know, like, and that's digging up dead bodies. Well, you can if you want, I guess. Some people have been known to work specific kind of traditional charms. It's kind of like, well, you know, that's not, and our ancestors were nothing but adaptive. And I don't think if our ancestors had penicillin and antibiotics back then, they would be like, no, sorry, it's not traditional, I'm not going to do that. They'd be like, fuck yeah, just give me the fucking drugs. I want to get well. And like the technologies that they had were looking to that kind of, you know, this is how they kept safe. We know more, but we've gone so far into the kind of disconnect from it that we need to bring back. And I use the term spiritual technologies in a way, because we've lost that connection. We've been too materialistic, that kind of, I'm very much a believer in a kind of, it's going to sound really hippy dippy stuff, but we have a brain, we have a heart, and we have our gut. And I very much believe that when we're in tune with our gut and our brain, we kind of hit that space of intuition. That's when we kind of know, when you're like in tune with that gut reaction and you're thinking, and that's where your heart space sits, in that kind of intuition stuff. And we've lost that connection.
I think that's also so much of the fun part of developing, you know, a modern self-directed spirituality that is as free as possible from dogma, but amplified by the potency of the collective. So this is why we share on blogs and things like that, to try to parse out, like, okay, I have a bit of a design brief here. How do I enact my spirituality where I am, given the location I'm in, and thinking of the dead below your feet, or the first in the graveyard. It reminded me of, researching Yule traditions in the last few years, and recognizing that there's one night of the 12 nights of Yuletide where one might recognize and honor the guardian of the land that you live on as the first man, they would say, who cleared the land. So here I am again. That feels problematic as a white person, under colonialism and the genocide of indigenous nations. So that's not really what I want to do where I am, but there is a night where I like to honor the spirits of the place, as well as the try to make well by making offerings, by making naming, for instance, naming whatever names I know of or even just hearkening to the original colonialists that came and the strife that they caused, and how can we make those sort of restless relationships a little more peaceful now, so that we can all today keep moving forward. And that's part of the promise of me, how do I honor ancestors that weren't very honorable? Well, I have to figure that out, and I have to be in relationship. And so I like that idea that, we need to figure out how to muddle through now. And some of those traditions are not going to be appropriate, but the spirit of them speaks to the promise that we made, that we recognize that there are others in the more than human realm that are giving us life, that are still, as Carolyn Casey says, cooperators are standing by. They're like still there waiting, and would love to be working out these sort of large scale cooperation dilemmas that we have in the modern age, grappling with an animist spirituality.
Yeah, I think for me, again, this is why it always comes back to community, because we're all well and good. And it's that kind of idea of like, okay, how I am in my house. It's like there's a kind of permission to flex there, I think, because it's going to sound weird, it's behind closed doors. It's not impacting on things. You're not appropriating things. If you're trying stuff out, you're not selling it, you're not making money from it, you're not. For me, appropriation is that I took this thing and I did this thing, and now you're all going to do this thing and you're going to pay me money to do this thing with you. That's for me full on appropriation. But we can't be scared to try out stuff. But if we look, but we do it in the right way, because Scottish folk tradition and folk magic is all about community. It's all about holding the honor in community, but it's also doing things in the right order of things as well. That, if you're wanting to look at the kind of rules behind it, it's literally like you will do things in the right order. You'll make sure that things are working for you. It's kind of like I'm working for your neighbors. So if you want to start, I guess, in a kind of thinking about how animism works, if you don't get on with your neighbors, that is not how animism works, because that's the idea. The right order is not in place. If you are tense with humans, how are you going to be with other people? And sometimes you're rightly tense with people, and I'm not saying like just be nice to everyone. That's not the idea, but the idea is to get in the right order of stuff, that what you have, you hold is yours, and you can say hi to people. And you know, if you find yourself in America in a place and this is something you're tackling, talk to the people who lived there before you. Reach out and be that person. And if they say like, fuck off, you're appropriating, horrible person, it's like, it's not your fault, for one, that that's someone's experience, but then it's your responsibility to heal that in right order. So then you're like, well, you know, I'm not, what can I do to demonstrate this, and how can we have a conversation? I want to do right by where I'm at with you and the land and where I stand with you, and how do we fix that? Not like, well, you're wrong and I'm going to do it anyway. It's literally like, animism does not work like that. And if you can't get it right with people, you're not going to get it right anywhere else, I don't think. And it's totally. It's the idea that it's not, for me, animism isn't like a belief, it's like an experience. It's a thing you do. And it's hard for me to write about the everyday things, because if you saw them, they would be so mundane and so like nothing. It's just like, here's a picture of my front door and here's me saying, thanks, see you later, house. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you can't put that on an Instagram post. Like you can't demonstrate what that looks like, because it's like an everyday experience. And we don't always live in right order of things all the time either. But when we find ourselves shifting out of stuff, we bring ourselves back, and we acknowledge that, okay, how I'm acting right now, I'm being a bit of a fucking ass. So I'm gonna bring it back to see kind of like where I'm at with my people. And it's also having the people around you who are gonna say, you know what, Scott, you're being a bit of an ass right now. And you go, okay, yeah, after having a stroke, like, I'm not. Then you're like, yeah, maybe I am.
Yeah, maybe I am. And sometimes it's not going to be the living people, because they might not see or know that you're being an ass. Sometimes it's going to be your dead, right? You say in one of the articles, the way we conceive of the dead today is not the same way as our ancestors. The dead were moving, roving things that could eat, fight, and fuck. And I love that, because my husband and I often kind of joke that we're an eat, drink, fight, fuck kind of couple, and it's pretty intense. And so, you know, but also I think I come from a long line of that. So my family folklore tells that my great-great Granny Graham had the second sight. And so as a young woman, she was a seamstress at what family folklore just calls the castle in Inverness, which, you know, like, we have no idea, just, I don't know which, but that she saw ghosts there. And I've wondered, as my training has become more around trauma recovery and somatic therapies, I've wondered whether she was so keen to leave Scotland and come to Canada because her felt sense of the trauma of the place where she lived was just, it was roving and eating at her. Like, if she was literally just haunted by loss upon loss upon loss, and felt like maybe she could get away from that if she, you know, moved to different land, or if she came to Canada. She came from around Inverness, and she went to what's called the Badlands, or the coulees of Alberta, southern Alberta. And it was an extremely difficult, you know, frontier lifestyle at the turn of the last century. It wasn't, I mean, I think she made the most of it. Kind of 1905. And she was the first in her family to speak English. She spoke Gaelic growing up, and they just went somewhere so remote. When I think about the vastness of Alberta versus the sort of villages that she and her husband, John Graham, that they grew up in, it's just so different, the isolation and loneliness. Anyway, she was well known as being like a really, really good, loving, soft woman. But that's not really how the generations after that came. And so I sometimes wonder if she thought that she'd just gotten away from some things that were maybe scary or difficult, and then it turned out that it visited upon the next generations, because it wasn't as, maybe you can't escape those things. But you've talked about how second sight is not a pleasant experience. It's not a, it's not a hashtag second sight Instagram kind of thing, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, about
yes,
how the modern mind romanticizes what
yeah.
these are?
Yes and no. I will share certain things because there are certain parts of second sight that if someone's it's kind of those things, if they're not doing and you know it, you kind of know that they're not telling you the truth, if in this kind of Scottish sense. I'm not going to share too much,
Okay.
but the idea of second sight, we have loads of people saying like, somewhere down the line someone sold their soul to the devil and now we all have it in this family line, which we know to now be kind of bullshit, really. It's kind of a thing, and it is something that goes down family lines and through genetics. It's literally there is the second sight family, if you like. But a second sight in the literature is characterized by faints and collapsing. If you start to think about kind of like what the first stages of like an epileptic fit might look like dropping to the floor and not being pleasant. Other accounts are people looking off to the far distance like they're not there, or smiling, or crying, or coming back and kind of telling the story. So in terms of kind of second sight, it was something. I'll tell you one thing from the literature that kind of makes how unpleasant second sight was. People with second sight wouldn't walk down the middle of the road because they were scared that they would get run over by ghosts, basically ghost things. And they also would be very quiet because they wouldn't initiate the conversation with people until they spoke to them first. Because if they spoke to, it's a tithe, like a ghost. That's where you get the word tithe shear from. It's like a ghost seer, so someone who sees ghosts. Then the ghost would not leave them alone because they had not acknowledged them first. And so they would become like, I can't remember what the Gaelic word, but it basically translates to like ghost haunted. So you'd have people who were constantly harassed all the time by these spirits that they could only they could see, who would be constantly at them. And also they would see, in terms of second sight, it's not about seeing the dead, it's about seeing a tithe, which is like a different construct of things. I guess we have a tithe when we're alive, but you also have one if you're dead, and you also have one if you're not born yet. It's that kind of, I guess we might call it
kind of like an aura or a soul, or
like, I guess we call it like a soul or a double, that kind of idea that they could see a tithe as someone that was still alive, and they would see how they were going to die. And because we have to think about the context of when people saw these people, they would see like a winding sheet around their feet, and the further up the body it was, that means the sooner that they were going to die, or they would glow, or they would be wet, which would show that they would drown. And they would see this, and they would see all of the things about the people on the island where they lived. And if you think about community all the time, they would know. They would know a lot about the people in the community that were going to die or suffer, or and that's quite a burden in my mind. And it's kind of like, well, I don't think that's actually much of a gift, because you're constantly having to be quiet, and other kind of you're kind of the weird one that people come and talk to you about, I want to know if my brother's dead, or you know what I mean. That would be, and then that would be your lot in life. That's all that you would be known for. But there is also other activities that people did on like the quarter days or the cross quarter days that would allow them a kind of glimpse into that kind of augury stuff. The Fria, I think it's pronounced, but it sounds like it should be called Frith, because it's Frith. It's a Frith. Anyway, someone correct me, please. And that's when you would stand on your doorstep and you would walk around your house with your eyes closed and all of this kind of stuff. And you can read again about that on the blog. And then you would open your eyes and you would look, and then the first thing that you would see would be an omen of what the question you asked for. So it was lots of the omens that we have are all to do with kind of like nature. If you see a duck or a pig or a horse or that kind of stuff. So in terms of the second sight, in traditionally, it's not a cool thing. You don't really want it. There are ways that you could get it, it's like it's basically the cat torture ritual. It's horrible. You would like put cats on a spit and you would roast them over a barbecue and keep them as alive as long as you could. So they would make loads and loads of noise, and you would do this over 7 days, and you weren't allowed to sleep. And then on the 7th day, the king of the cats would come and say, "What can I give you to stop torturing these cats?" And you could ask for the second sight that way if you're into that.
That's really fucking hardcore, and that's not who I would want to go to for, like, that's definitely a dark art.
Yeah, and it's literally all the people that performed this, which you can find it online if you're of the nature, would go mad or die, or there would be something really horrible that would happen to them. So it was kind of like you got what you wanted, but in that terms of that, we're going to gift this, but then you're gonna not live very long afterwards. So in terms of the second sight, there is that kind of element to it being like a hideous thing that people want to get rid of, because do you want to know really when all your friends are going to die, when you're going to die, when your neighbor's going to die? What happened to little Nicky in the army? Do you really want to see these kind of things? So I think there's a huge difference between what we class as second sight and the hi'alu, which is second sight in Gaelic. It's bad pronunciation. And what we now view as like ghost watch or whatever, that when people like, well, I can see dead people, and it's a different modality. Let's just say it's like a different thing.
But it sort of also brings in that, in the witch hunts records that you were looking at, people had these helpful dead that were coming and saying, "Hey, I'll make you a deal." But there's also the restless dead. And they're, so we're kind of talking about the folklore around that, but we are forgetting about the roving and eating and fighting and like the restlessness. So what have you discovered about how one would help the restless dead become peaceful dead?
Do you know, nothing really, if I'm being honest, because Scotland's a huge melting pot, as you'll be aware. We have Norman, Gaelic, Pictish, Irish, Norse, Anglo-Saxon, gosh, you name it, a huge melting pot of things. And the stories of the roving restless dead come from the stories of the revenants from Norse literature and Norse tradition and Scandinavian, where people would sit in cairns and barrows, they would still be alive, and you would see a glow, and someone would be like, "Oh, that must be where the treasure is." And then they would go and they would get murdered by whatever lived in the barrow. But there was also stories of people coming back and like sleeping with their wives, and they couldn't get them out the house. And whole teams of people who were drowned, and they would always come back, obviously, around Yule, because that's the time of the slough and the death returning. There's a lot of things you could do to stop it from happening. If someone died, like you could take them through a hole in your house, and you would make sure that you'd also again follow the right order of things. If you did something wrong, then that's the likelihood of they will return. If you kind of like fuck it up along the way, or like you cry too much, or these kind of things. So there's lots of things you can do to prevent that. And a lot of the things that you do to prevent the dead returning are very similar to what you would do to prevent fairies from entering your house. So it's kind of like cold iron and round crosses and all of those kind of things. So there's a huge, but to help, like I couldn't tell you what people did to help them move on from things.
They really focused on that ounce of prevention.
Yeah, and it's kind of like an ounce of prevention was a pound of cure, I guess. But I'm sure there's amazing stories about, people dealing with, once things have happened, how did we stop that? And it's going to be lots of killing and murdering things, I can imagine. I would love to, if anyone has any like ideas or heard stories about how that's happened, I would love to hear them, because it's something I haven't really looked into. So
if there was one ritual then that you would just want to make sure it's your ounce of prevention doing the right thing sometime between Samhain and Yule, let's say, if you're like, no, the one sort of ancestral observance or animist observance, the one thing I would definitely not want to forget to do, what would that be for you personally?
I guess it's like two things. One is I always have round crosses on all of my doors. I always just make sure.
Is that the cross and like out of Rowan, let's say, and it has the circle of, is that what you're talking about?
Traditionally, rather than, okay, this is not good for radio, right? Because I'm demonstrating with my fingers, rather than like a cross up and down, you have to imagine like it's like an X rather than an up and down cross.
Okay.
Equal armed X was the traditional pattern. And so they would wrap them with red thread, because rowan tree and red thread keeps the whatever from it's witches, warlocks, there's lots
bad fairies, all the things. Okay.
So that's the one thing that I would always do, but also kind of make sure that you are feeding and again, it's about community, so it's about celebrating with your friends, it's about keeping people close, but also the other community, keeping them close. So it's the idea of like, just keep up that kind of, if you have like a weekly, personally I have like a weekly like weekly touch-in with things, and it's a very simple sit chat kind of affair. We won't go in, but you have these every day, every week kind of things that you do. So yeah, in terms of the kind of Samhain Yule thing, just make sure you're in right order, make sure that you're kind of celebrating with people and your house is warm and things aren't coming at you, if you know what I mean. Put things to bed, I think, at this time of year is really, really important. You don't want lingering things, because things have a habit of picking up on those lingering things, be it human or non-human, I suppose. So that would be my one thing, rowan crosses and that kind of protective stuff. And also it's great to do with people and tell the stories and talk about your ancestry and stuff. It's just nice. And I'm of the idea that Samhain and Yule have been very focused on the kind of dead coming back, but I think they're present at every single quarter festival. It's not just this special time, it's just that like this is where we go into the darker points, so we get more of the kind of stories told around fires and things coming back, but they're there at Beltane, and they're there at Nasser, they're there everywhere. Yeah. It's not like a one-off affair. So yeah, I would say just keep things in right order would be my one thing, if I had to do that. But then I guess there's like the whole nuclear armament stuff if you want to go there. But
if you want, if you need to, like, pull out the heavy duty salt and
the whole
yeah. So in your life, you mentioned just very briefly that you've worked with a lot of really marginalized populations. You're very engaged in the world as a human rights activist, as and also with the more than human world as well, navigating a lot of where we come to crossroads and potential conflict. And I would just imagine that means that you are intimately acquainted with grief and rage. And the last question on the show is always just how are you personally coping with the grief and rage that you might feel at the state of the world?
Oh my God, what a question. We could be here for another hour, right? First off, I want to say that those are totally natural feelings for people to have grief and rage at things. You don't want to be burying them. You want to be talking about them and probably mobilizing with it as well. You use that energy to do something about stuff. So yeah, don't bury it, talk about it, and use it as, because rage is good. It's not a bad thing, you know. Rage is only bad if you turn it against yourself or other people in a kind of negative sense, but it also gives us the ability to get a Greta out there, you know. She's feeling so much rage right now, and her UN speech when she's like, how dare, like, wow, like I can't even, and that's her using her rage for a really good purpose, and directed in a healthy way. So I say use your grief and your rage to move you forward into something. So if you're feeling like this is just too much, I don't know what to do and I'm really angry about it, just do something small. Start there. And reflect back on my rage at people saying this is Scottish tradition and it's not. Write about it, get it out there. It doesn't have to be popular, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It's just get your voice heard. Do something small with it, and then who knows where that will lead to. And just again, kind of, talk about it to people, share the experience. Don't deal with it alone, and don't hold it to yourself because it doesn't lead anywhere. Pin it to a notice board if you have to. Talk about it, draw it, like whatever. But use, because we're all feeling it. I think anyone anywhere at the moment, be whatever side of whatever you're on, is angry about something. But use it to move forward the right order of things. Don't let it destroy the right order of things for you wherever you're at. So I guess that's a bit vague because like I don't know where you would go with more than that. But if you are feeling awful and terrible, reach out to somebody and talk to somebody about it. Don't keep it to yourself. That's probably the worst thing that you can do. And you'll probably find out when you do reach out to other people, they're feeling similar and you can share. And then there's two of you that are maybe pissed off.
Together.
Together, which is better, maybe. I don't know.
For sure. Well, I really want to thank you for putting your research out into the world and contributing your voice, but also for animating the stories and for taking the time to talk with me and share this conversation, because I have found the Cailleachs Herbarium just such a powerfully profound and deep repertoire of tools, stories, mythology, folklore that help me feel connected back to myself, help me feel into my own DNA a little better. It really has been very soul soothing for me. So thank you so much, Scott.
That's really nice to hear, and thank you for chatting. It's been really good. It's been nice. Thank you so much.
Okay, so super exciting news, friends. Because of this episode, Scott and his collaborators Amanda and Debbie are re-releasing the Tales of the Tailleachs concept album. I'm so stoked about it. I'm pretty sure I was the first one to purchase. He said we needed 100 albums pre-sold in order to remake it again, and I begged him. I was like, please just do it, and we'll promote it, and I'll let everybody know, and then just tell them it's a pre-order, and you're not going to make it until you get 100. And then before I could even edit this episode, I think he got 100. So I don't know how long the shopping cart's going to be open. It's another limited edition though, so if you're into it, do it now. Go to Cailleachs Herbarium, and remember, there's a dash in there. So it's CAILLEACHS-Herbarium, and then go to the shop tab in the navigation. So big thanks to Scott for re-releasing that album for us and for sharing such great stories with us today and wisdom and insight. Just fantastic. So I highly recommend you follow Cailleachs Herbarium on Facebook for updates when new articles come out. Now, my friends, this is the part of the wrap-up when I usually tell you a little bit about Quest and then nudge you to reach out if you're interested in coming with us. But actually, at this point, in October of 2019, it looks like Quest 2020 is already full, basically. There might be one spot left if I don't get someone's deposit soon, but at this point, basically, if you're interested, looks like you'll be put on a wait list. That said, I mean, hey, anything can happen. Sometimes there's a bit of musical chairs, at the last minute. There's a bit of shuffling, so maybe it's worth reaching out to put your name on the wait list. And I mean, hey, if we get 6 people on a wait list for 2020, maybe we'll run a second one then. I don't know. I have to ask Ruben. Anyway. Let me know, and don't shilly-shally if you're interested in coming on Quest. It seems like you need to put your hand up at least a year in advance, so just giving you some notice about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the rest of the season of the Numinous Podcast, and look forward to sharing more stories with you next time. Until then, take care.